Alright, hello everybody. So today I want to be making a video on just how, simple things you can do to improve. Now, outside of your actual, and these are all things that are outside of your actual gameplay. So, one of the things I noticed when I was taking a lot of trains in Japan, I go through my YouTube feed, see a lot of people's videos, see, people's guides on certain things, you see their kills on certain bosses and whatnot, and there's an awful lot of people who really have skipped the fundamentals. So when a big part of getting better at this game and getting really good logs in this game is setting yourself up for success, and the easiest way to do that is by making sure that you enable yourself to do well. Now, there's a few very, very key things that are not in the game by default, but there should be something you do to improve your gameplay. So I'm just going to go over them today, basically because Australian internet and I'm blagging for some weird reason. So I thought it'd be a good time to make another video. So now the first thing I want to be talking about is your raid frames. Now, I was watching some people on my server, and their mythic world 5th or 6th Hellier kill, and their raid frames. Now this is going to be a very opinion sort of based piece, but it is something that, if you think about it logically, it's really not not a very hard step to see why it's a good thing. So your raid frames. Now, as a healer, they're the most important thing you're going to be watching. You play off your raid frames. You need and you dodge shit on the ground. You do mechanics, and you play off your raid frames. So where your eyes are looking, you want that to be in the center of your screen. So it only makes sense to have your raid frames in the center of your screen or around them. People have it at the bottom where I have it now. This is just the display frames, that's why it's coming up like this. So I have mine in the center of the screen. You can have it sort of like up here or up here, and then you have stuff on opposite sides, whatever, but just as long as it's something that's centralized. Now the default Blizzard one gives it in the side here, and it's there because majority of people play DPS, play tanks. The raid frames, the specific health of people, is not their major concern. But for healers, it completely is. So it is something you want to have very centralized on your screen. Now that, you don't have to have a fancy, raid UI set up like this. You can have, default UI raid frames work really, really well. They're actually really well set up. Literally the only reason I don't use them is because I like to see when, say, like a tank or a DPS or someone has a defensive cooldown up. Alright, so the next thing I want to cover is mouseovers. So, especially for disc, but for any healer, there is no reason to be, click on someone, cast a heal. You can see my lags being real sweet here. Click on someone, cast a heal, and then click on somebody else. You want to target target someone to cast smite. You have to find your target, click on them, make sure it's not the wrong target, etc. It's so many more steps to do that than it is just to set up a few simple mouseovers. Now we'll have a look at some of the macros I have. So you can see here, /cast at mouseover, if it exists. This extra set of square brackets makes it so it casts on yourself if you don't have a target. That's all that's for. And then obviously the spell name. Very simple to set up. There is literally no reason for people not to be playing with mouseovers. It takes you 10 minutes to do every single spell you have. It really does not change your gameplay that much to where you have to relearn it. You can switch over to it 5 minutes before raid, and you will notice the difference immediately. You can keep a target constantly. You'll find your damage will be significantly higher because you're not trying to fiddle around with what thing to target all the time. and you know, you just have an overall easier time switching between people. You know, as I said again, this is something I saw in very high end, you know, raiders who just don't do this stuff, and it really is something you just need to do to set yourself up for success. So you know, it's a very easy one there. There's really no reason not to be using mouseovers. Alright, so the next one is going to be keybinding positioning. Now, I've talked about this previously in I have a whole video based on keybindings, but when you're setting up your keybinds, you want to have a plan of where you put them. So you want to make sure that as a healer, the spells you can cast on the move, you can cast on the move. So what does this mean? This means that if I wanted to move to the right, for example, and I want to press, I guess what's a better one? If I want to move to the left and press, say, Shift Q, I will really struggle to do that. So what do I have on Shift Q? I have an ability that you can't use on the move, right? So that's just, you know, something, a little example. But the better what I'm trying to say really is you want to have your spells, say, like, you know, for disc is, you know, my main specs where I've, you know, put the most effort into making sure that everything is set up in the best way possible. So Power Word Shield is probably one of the most important spells to be using as disc, something you want to be using on cooldown, and something you can use on the move. So I can move every direction, press E super simply, so that's why it is on E. R I can press very easily too, and 3 I can press, you know, very easily as well. So those 3 keys, 3, E, R, 4, are personally my easiest spells to press. So that's why you see Power Shield, Plea, and Penance, and then Smite, the filler, there as well. So that's why you see those 3 spells like that. Now, that is something, you know, people are very against doing, is changing their key bindings, because it can, you know, it really is hard to get used to, say if you've been using a sort of set of key bindings for a certain amount of time, but in the long run it really does help you out. Now the example I gave in the last video when I talked about key bindings was with when I was playing Shadow. So I had Vampiric Touch and I had Vampiric Touch on E, and I had Shadow Word Paint on Q. Now, I played with that for a fairly long time during Warlords of Draenor, and I found that I couldn't move to the left and press Q very easily. Now, Q, Shadow Word Paint is what you press on the move as Shadow. So, you know, I realized that, and I went, wait, this is not the best way of doing it, changed it across. You know, it took me, you know, 2-3 days to get used to. It took me a week to get completely used to, but it was a significantly better change. And you know, it's little minor things like that. Setting yourself up for success is really going to help you in the long run. So, you know, it might sound like a very minor change, but you know, everything helps. You know, gameplay is something that's very hard to improve, very hard to analyze, but this setting yourself up is, you know, a very easy way to ensure that you're gonna make it a lot easier for yourself. Now, the last thing, obviously, is a big thing that plagues a lot of players is clicking. You know, as a healer, especially, clicking is the devil, because you're using your mouse to move and target people. You're also using your mouse to move around. So your mouse movement is very challenged as it is, and if you're going to be clicking on spells, you're going to have a really bad time. Doesn't matter what spell it is, there should be nothing you're clicking. You know, there are what I personally suggest to do. I've never been a clicker. I have never, you know, had any spell that I've clicked on. That's just the way I learned to play WoW. So I haven't had a problem with it. But, you know, it really stems from kind of the fact where people don't have the proper key binding set up. They don't have key binding set up that are easy to press, so they prefer to click on certain things. So again, that's, you know, the last point is, you know, set yourself up with the right key binds in the right positions. You know, spend the time to get used to it, and you'll find yourself not clicking on them. Another way kind of to force you to do it is do what I have here. I have a little grid down in the corner, very simply laid out. You know, I don't use my grid here to track my cooldowns. I have weak auras and stuff to do that, and I just have this across all characters. There is no way in a raid scenario I'm going to move my mouse from the middle of my screen over to here to click some spell, because I have it appropriately keybind. Anyway, so that's something. I hope people learnt something from that. So, you know, the 4 things. So centralized raid frames, mouse overs, proper key bindings, and not clicking. So if everyone, you know, can, you know, put some thought into that, put some thought into how they set them up, I can guarantee you're going to notice some benefit in your next raid. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.